Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. We've got a great program lined up for you this week. You can find archives of previous programs on our YouTube channel. Don't worry, there's no cameras in here. It's just the audio recordings. Search Freedom and Prosperity Radio on YouTube. And, of course, learn more about us at virginiainstitute.org. Especially as the General Assembly continues to mishandle the COVID-19 shutdowns. You can take a look at our white paper, some of our efforts. They're interesting to see now that the World Health Organization says things like Governor Northam's shutdowns are actually hurting us, not helping us. I think we're supposed to follow the science. Anyway, our first guest, who's actually our first guest last week, more to get into with the folks at the Family Foundation. Todd Gathje is back on with us, Director of Government Relations there. Todd, welcome back to the program. How are you doing, sir?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back on. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, so much of this shutdown has hit the families, both, sending mom or dad home from work because the governor has dictated that they're non-essential. Can't imagine that having any psychological impacts. Telling kids they can't be near their friends because they're super spreaders, and then telling them they have to try to figure out how to learn from home on computer systems that, quite honestly, I hear too frequently get hacked into anyway pre-COVID, and now we're sending kids home and saying, use the Zoom app. As a matter of fact, the very earliest news story about education and COVID-19 came out of New York City, where the New York City public school system insisted that all teachers stop using Zoom because of massive security issues there. And you guys are is equally concerned with young children and privacy on the internet, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. I think that many families across Virginia are facing the scenario in which they have been effectively forced into going into virtual schooling. For homeschool families, they've been doing this for years, right? And they've been successful at it, but they made that choice. But unfortunately, for many working families, their kids now are forced into a virtual setting, and that puts them in a situation where their children are at risk to have their privacy violated, to have their education completely disrupted, and also to present some health concerns for the children by not being able to have that connection with their friends that you mentioned in your opening to this segment, that they don't have that connection with their friends, that socialization. But yeah, we have some real deep concerns about the privacy implications of virtual schooling and what schools are doing to prevent that going forward.
And certainly, the issues range from just, data collection to even more insidious and heartbreaking stories. Why it doesn't take you long enough to say well-beloved stone in the Commonwealth of Virginia to realize that there are bad teachers out there who are in the schools with bad intents, and perhaps not for every teacher, for every student, but once you're given the access to a kid online, and in many cases a private setting without any other witnesses, if you want to use the phrase. I hate to use it that way, but let's face it, that's part and parcel of what in-classroom education is all about, is you have your peer groups around you and support groups, and if something is not going right, you have people you can talk to. But if you're in your bedroom on a computer trying to learn and the teachers start saying things they're not supposed to say or asking you for things they're not supposed to ask for, who are you supposed to turn to?
Yeah, that's a really good point. When we talk about privacy, we have really kind of two ways that we're looking at this. The first one is what teachers and administrators are able to see in this video conferencing that they have, whether it's through Zoom or whatever sort of platform that they may be using, and then also the data collection that's taking place. So, if you look at the privacy of what's happening on the screen, teachers, we're seeing these reports of young children, getting suspended or in trouble for having a Nerf gun in the background. One teenager recently got in trouble for having a Trump sign, a flag in the background. We also have reports coming out of New York and Massachusetts where parents have been visited by social services because their child didn't actually log into the Zoom class. they were being, investigated for neglect. So I think that there are a lot of privacy concerns that we need to be aware of, and we need to make sure that we put in place some parameters that protect what's happening in the home versus what the teachers can obviously see and determine are real concerns that maybe need to go to an administrator. But the fact that these teachers have this ability and these administrators to make observations and come to their own conclusions is a real scary. And so we want to make sure that going forward that there are proper limitations put in place, and we're hoping to pursue some legislation this General Assembly session, the regular session, if the special session ever ends, but in the regular session to try and address some of these privacy concerns.
Well, you talk about that because if, let's say, I'm on a Zoom conference call with the police commissioner of Charlottesville, and she happens to see something that looks like a water pipe on my windowsill, they still can't come in and arrest me for it, although I understand they can go to a judge with the video screen cap and say, this is, reasonable suspicion, give us a warrant to search the guy's home or office, when there would have never been one otherwise. Line this up with both the Third and Fourth Amendments of the Constitution and how these government agents are being inserted into our homes, and can there be good legislation? Give us a thumbnail sketch of what you guys are hoping to get written into the law.
Well, yeah, you raise a good point on with regards to our constitutional amendments, especially on the Fourth Amendment, right, privacy, and that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that any of the videos that are being used cannot be that we put in place some protections to make sure that they can't be used for situations involving. I'm just trying to think of some good examples that would come to mind. We just want to make sure that the legislation that comes before the General Assembly makes sure that Virginia is in line with FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, to make sure that their information is not going to be revealed. The privacy that is in their home, what's going on in their home, can't be revealed and made public, because there could be some real some things going on in the house that maybe are private that a family is trying to work through that is seen on camera. We want to make sure that they're adequately vetted before any law enforcement or any government agencies use that to have a search warrant to go into a home to question family members or parents. So we're going to be looking into legislation like that. But also, the other aspect of it is making sure that we protect child data, their education. Google, for instance, has been collecting biometric data. So what are the platforms that we're using in these virtual settings? So we want to make sure that legislation addresses some of that, to make sure that there is no third party that's collecting data without parents' notice on the side that can be used for data tracking, for maybe targeting these children, because if you look at some of these platforms, Zoom, Google, they're collecting usernames, the school's name, the device, the network connection that they're using, and then they're also tracking the actions, things like their clicks, their messages, their logins, and they have real access to that student's entire life and to that family for that matter. So we need to make sure that the legislation also addresses some of those aspects.
I guess it goes back to what is admissible in terms of the municipal side of it, but then you open up the whole other Pandora's box. Todd Gathje is the Director of Government Relations at the Family Foundation. We're talking about the threats that have come into a lot of homes during COVID-19 and the shutdowns because we're doing virtual and distance educations. Todd, you talked about one of the things many of our area schools now have developed very strange, very hard to enforce, but yet all still very real dress codes regarding what can be seen on a kid's T-shirt. You mentioned somebody was in trouble for a Trump sign in their bedroom. Well, they wouldn't have been in trouble for that had they been in classroom because nobody would have seen it. What if a kid has a book or a Dukes of Hazzard DVD with a Confederate flag on it that are considered hate speech by some of our area school divisions?
Yeah, that's another concern is what sort of imagery, what sort of content is going to be viewed on these virtual learning platforms. And our concern is that you could have young kids in elementary school maybe be inadvertently or purposefully have sexually explicit pictures or graphic images maybe appear during the audio-visual time, the online learning time, and that could take place. We've seen in the past where people have actually hacked into these virtual classrooms and has acted weird, and there's nothing to prevent them from being able to show a screenshot of something, maybe something on the computer. So there are some real causes for concern for parents, and they need to be aware of this. So there needs to be some caution as they move forward with these virtual learning platforms.
What about, and you mentioned the personal information, and I referenced New York City Public Schools had a major issue with Zoom very early on in the pandemic, saying, hold it, we just discovered major access points. Their own IT department did and said, everyone off of Zoom now. And then Zoom came back and said, well, we're working on addressing those. You guys are using us way more than we expected to. Pay no attention to the man. But they never came back and told us what the results of some of those security fixes were. Whenever I do a Zoom meeting, I generally either point my camera out the window of my office or I shut my camera off if possible, just to make sure that some of the stuff isn't going out. But that still leaves my whole my phone in my case, but somebody's laptop, computer, or tablet open to somebody to log in there and download bank data, browsing history, friends' phone numbers, email addresses, that kind of thing. That's really frightening. Social security numbers even. Yeah, in many instances, we hear about schools starting to provide Chromebooks or some type of laptops, but in most cases, these kids are using home computers. They're using the computers that their moms or their dads use to bank, to carry out activities that involve sensitive information like Social Security numbers. And that opens the door for hackers. It opens the door for people to come into your internet, to log into your computer to access this private information and then be able to use it. So that is another. It's a great point. That's another concern. As far as I wanted to go back to that privacy, just to remind everybody that the Parent Coalition for Data Privacy recommends that parents cover their students' webcams unless they're actively using something like a Zoom platform, and that's coming from a parent organization. That really does kind of throw a wrench into some of these virtual classrooms where you have to be on there, you have to be seen, and I think that, and that's to protect the kids, and that the only time that they should remove that sticker, or come onto the video is if they're, talking, they're presenting, they're engaging in the classroom activities. So we want to make sure that maybe there are some ways for students, for parents to be able to navigate this virtual learning without having to have maybe cameras rolling 24/7 or however long they're in class, whether it's 6 hours or 6 hours a day. But you raise a great point, is that you have between the webcams of the virtual learning, the using your home computer with sensitive information on there, allowing the potential for hackers to come in, and that can happen at any time, right? I mean, we all know that people's laptops can be hacked, but when you have students that are actively using your computer,
During the day, you certainly open it up and make it available for people who want to come in and steal your information, steal your identity. So these are still some things that local governments, that the state governments need to be addressing going forward.
Well, Todd, would I be over the top in pointing out that if anyone's ever tried to visit their kids at school, even parents, it's a check-in, it's an office, it's show ID, it's get a pass, it's have a note, and woe be anyone who's not a direct relative of a child trying to get access to them at school. It's a no-go. Leave whatever you need to leave with the child here, and we'll make sure that once we clear it with the parents, it gets to them or anything like that. So, where the school buildings, the brick and mortar locations are more and more secure every day, it seems. This is like having every kid just sit in the food court of the shopping mall and, let strangers wander around them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that I think as we consider this, obviously this is going to be happening for probably well into the spring. Who knows how long schools? Here in Virginia, we're hearing about some that are going to start going back face to face, which is great. I live in a county that allowed us the option to choose between face to face or virtual learning. And isn't it great that we have school? This is actually sparking school choice discussions where we can have the choice. It's great. And there are those families that that want to make that decision. But as we give them these platforms, these tools to use for virtual learning, we want to make sure that they are done in a safe manner, that their privacy is protected, and that local governments are not just given the ability to just start going in and accusing and investigating parents for every little violation or everything that they see that could be a concern, whether it's a Nerf gun, whether it's a BB gun in the background. These are things that majority of Americans have in their house, and so we want to make sure that just some of this silliness it does not become the topic of the day. That they can move forward with some good learning. And I'll just, I think one other point I'll make is that in Connecticut, the governor has issued an order to essentially bypass privacy to provide quality online education. I read this earlier this morning, essentially that they wanted to make sure that they have quality, efficient, great, Zoom or whatever the platform is that they're using to provide this education, but they're willing to sort of bypass the issues of privacy. And I think that's where we need to make sure we draw the line. Is look, if you want to make sure they have good connections, you want to make sure they have good learning opportunities through this virtual learning. Well, let's make sure we don't bypass those privacy concerns that parents and students and teachers should all have.
Never mind,
when we consider this,
Never mind the ABCs. We need the VPNs to be instituted into the school discussion. Todd, it's so you, as government relations director at the Family Foundation, give us an idea of who you're talking to in the General Assembly, House or Senate, in terms of carrying this legislation, or is that still way more cart before we get a horse?
Yeah, that's kind of we're sort of looking at the legislation in any kind of language, and we do have there are several legislators out there that tried this special session to address issues related to virtual learning and to provide some resources to families. One in particular is Senator Donovan here in the Henrico area. Senator Amanda Chase is another who tried to, in the Senate, tried to push forward some voucher-like provisions under an emergency if a student is not allowed to go back face-to-face to help them cover the costs of online learning, computers, and maybe that could even go towards privacy protections as well. But I think that there are a number of legislators in both the House and the Senate that realize, look, if you're not going to go back to face-to-face, then we need to make sure that virtual learning in Virginia is done safely and upholds the highest standards of privacy for our families.
Amen.
And I think you'll see a lot of legislators trying to address that going forward.
Well, and certainly we see, many school divisions like Louisa with very, very few issues with kids with COVID. And now the World Health Organization is saying, we may have been wrong about the whole lockdown idea. So we'll see where that takes us. Todd Gathje, Director of Government Relations at the Family Foundation. Thank you so much for the double dip. We're glad you were able to make time for us 2 weekends in a row. But thank you so much for everything you guys do, top to bottom, at the Family Foundation. And I wish more people didn't immediately say, "Oh, they are," and then insert, "Oh, that's the truth about everything in our lives." Because I think there's a lot of my friends who are members of the Democratic Party who would hear what you had to say and say, "Well, yeah, not just yeah, but hell yeah," and that's why we need to get some bipartisan movement on stuff like this. And thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate all your work. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, anytime. Coming up next, one of the most famous columnists, opinionists of all time. He's president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation now. He is P.J. O'Rourke, and he's got a book out called A Cry from the Far Middle, Dispatches from a Divided Land. Coming up next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.